In June of 2022, divers returned once again to a shipwreck that had already changed the way we understand ancient technology. For more than a century, the wreck near the Greek island of Antikythera had been studied, photographed, mapped, and carefully excavated. It had already revealed extraordinary artifacts, bronze statues, luxury goods, and most famously, a complex mechanical device now known as the Antikythera mechanism, often described as the world's first analog computer. To many historians, the site seemed almost exhausted. Yet beneath layers of marine deposits and quiet sediment, something had been sitting unnoticed for decades. It looked like nothing more than a misshapen stone, heavy, rounded, covered in thick mineral crust. It had been cataloged, photographed, and largely ignored. But in 2022, a closer examination changed everything. When researchers compared the object to nearby fragments, including the base of a statue still standing upright on the seafloor, the truth slowly emerged. The stone was not a stone at all. It was the head of Hercules. 2,000 years underwater had softened its features. The once sharp lines of the sculpture were blurred by centuries of erosion. But the proportions matched perfectly with the statue's lower body that had been discovered nearby. What had once appeared meaningless was suddenly part of a complete figure again. And in that moment, the wreck revealed a quiet truth about archaeology. The past rarely hides in dramatic places. More often, it sits silently in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask a better question. Yet the statue was not the only discovery made among the debris. Inside hardened marine concretions, lumps of mineral that form around objects underwater, archaeologists found something far more intimate. Human teeth, small, fragile, embedded in the same deposits that preserved the ship's cargo. These were not relics of art or engineering. They were traces of the people who had been aboard the vessel when it sank around 60 BCE. For centuries, the wreck had been viewed primarily as a lost shipment of luxury goods, likely traveling toward Rome. But those teeth reminded researchers of something easy to forget. Ancient trade was not just about objects. It was about people, merchants, sailors, craftsmen, lives that moved across oceans long before modern navigation, lives that sometimes ended suddenly beneath the waves. Yet the Antikythera wreck represents only one chapter in a much larger story. A story about how ancient civilizations connected with one another across vast distances, and how the networks they built shaped the world in ways we are still uncovering today. Far to the north of the Mediterranean, in a place few would associate with ancient trade routes, another discovery emerged in 2022. This time, the discovery came not from archaeologists, but from soldiers. Near the city of Odessa in Ukraine, members of the 126th Territorial Defense Brigade were digging defensive trenches during the early months of the ongoing conflict. The ground beneath them was dense clay, difficult to break. As they dug deeper, the soldiers began to uncover curved ceramic shapes. At first, the objects looked like ordinary fragments of pottery, but soon it became clear that the vessels were intact. Large ceramic containers, carefully shaped with narrow necks and rounded bodies. They were amphorae. Archaeologists later confirmed that these jars were approximately 2,500 years old. They had once been part of a Greek trading network that stretched across the Black Sea. In the ancient world, amphorae served as standardized shipping containers. They carried olive oil, wine, grain, fish sauce. Their shapes were so consistent that merchants could estimate the contents simply by looking at the vessel's form. In a way, they functioned much like modern cargo containers. And their discovery beneath a modern battlefield carried an unexpected message. History does not disappear when the world moves forward. It accumulates, layer upon layer. Every road, every city, every field sits on top of older stories. Stories that often reveal themselves only when circumstances force the ground to open again. Sometimes through careful excavation, and sometimes through crisis. Yet trade networks did not only carry goods across continents, they also carried ideas, technologies, and occasionally, something far more dangerous. For centuries, historians debated the origins of one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, the Black Death. Between 1346 and 1352, the plague swept across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, killing tens of millions of people. Entire towns vanished. Trade routes collapsed. Societies were permanently reshaped. But one question remained unresolved. Where did it begin? Ancient chronicles mention disease arriving from the east, but no clear starting point had ever been confirmed. That changed when researchers began examining burial sites near Lake Issyk-Kul in modern Kyrgyzstan. At two cemeteries, Kara-Jigach and Burana, archaeologists noticed something unusual in the inscriptions on several gravestones. The dates clustered around a very narrow window, 1338 and 1339. And many of the stones included a single word: pestilence. The inscriptions suggested that a sudden wave of disease had struck the community, but written records alone could not confirm what kind of disease it had been. To answer that question, researchers turned to a method that would have been unimaginable to the people buried there: genetic sequencing. Scientists carefully extracted samples from the dental pulp of several individuals buried during those exact years. Teeth are uniquely valuable in ancient DNA research. The pulp inside is protected by enamel, creating a sealed environment where biological material can survive for centuries. When the DNA was analyzed, the result was unmistakable: the bacteria Yersinia pestis, the organism responsible for bubonic plague. Even more striking was the genetic lineage of the strain. It matched the ancestral form from which later European plague strains evolved. In other words, this small cemetery in Central Asia appears to mark one of the earliest known outbreaks connected to the pandemic that would soon devastate half of Europe. And the mechanism of its spread was already well known: trade. Along the vast network of caravan routes known collectively as the Silk Road, merchants, animals, and goods moved continuously between east and west. Along with them traveled rodents and fleas. The fleas carried the bacteria, and the bacteria followed the trade routes. Within a few years, the disease reached ports along the Black Sea. From there, ships carried it into the Mediterranean. The same maritime networks that transported spices, textiles, and metals also carried one of history's most lethal biological events. Yet, not all ancient discoveries are linked to tragedy. Some reveal something quieter, something older, a moment when humanity, or perhaps even something before humanity, first began experimenting with the physical world. At a limestone quarry in western Galilee, Palestine, researchers uncovered evidence of a technological breakthrough that occurred nearly 800,000 years ago. At the Evron quarry site, archaeologists discovered flint tools and fragments of an elephant tusk that showed signs of extreme heat exposure. At first, it seemed possible that the materials had simply been caught in a natural wildfire. But further analysis told a different story. Thermal testing revealed that the flint had been heated to temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. Such controlled heating changes the structure of flint, making it easier to shape into sharp tools. This process is known as heat treatment. Today, it is recognized as one of the earliest forms of material engineering. What makes the Evron quarry discovery extraordinary is its age. 800,000 years ago, Homo sapiens did not yet exist. The individuals who heated these stones belonged to earlier hominin species. Yet they had discovered something remarkable. that fire could transform materials, that heat could make stone stronger, sharper, more useful. It suggests careful observation, experimentation, planning, and perhaps even cooperation among groups of early humans. Innovation, it seems, did not suddenly appear with modern humanity. It had been developing for hundreds of thousands of years, across continents, across cultures, often in ways that left only faint traces behind. Sometimes a heated stone, sometimes a carved monument, and sometimes an object whose meaning remains deeply mysterious. On the western coast of Sardinia, scattered across a burial site known as Monte Prama, stand dozens of towering sandstone statues. They rise up to 8 feet tall. Warriors, archers, boxers. Their bodies are rigid, stylized, almost mechanical. But the most striking feature is their eyes. Each statue has large circular discs carved into the face, giving them an expression that feels strangely distant, almost otherworldly. These figures were created by the Nuragic civilization between the 11th and 8th centuries BCE. What puzzles archaeologists is not just their appearance, it is their sudden arrival. Before Monte Prama, no Mediterranean culture had produced freestanding statues of this scale, and after this period, the tradition disappears again. No clear prototypes, no gradual development, just a sudden burst of monumental sculpture, and then silence. The Nuragic civilization left no written records explaining the statue's purpose. Most researchers believe they served as guardians of nearby tombs, symbols of strength, protection, ancestral memory. But the deeper meaning behind their creation remains uncertain. They stand there today as silent witnesses, watching, unexplained. A reminder that some chapters of human history were never written down, and some messages, carved in stone, may never be fully understood. Yet perhaps the most surprising discoveries often come not from monuments or weapons, but from the quiet details of daily life. In northern Peru, archaeologists excavating a burial site at Huaca Las Ventanas uncovered a tomb dating back roughly 1,000 years. Inside lay the remains of a man buried with extraordinary objects: a gold funerary mask, a bronze pectoral, and beside him, a bundle of tools, 50 bronze knives, along with needles, awls, and other instruments. At first glance, the tools resembled weapons, but their shapes suggested something far more delicate. They were surgical instruments. The knives were made from arsenic-enriched bronze, a material harder than typical bronze alloys. Such durability would have been essential for precise cutting. Even more intriguing was a fragment of tree bark placed among the tools. Chemical analysis suggests it may have been used as a medicinal substance, possibly an early form of pain relief. If that interpretation is correct, this individual may have practiced a form of surgery that combined metal instruments with natural pharmacology. In other words, a medical specialist. And the richness of his burial suggests something equally important. In that society, medical knowledge was not just practical. It was prestigious, respected, valued. The surgeon was buried not simply as a technician, but as an elite member of the community. Across these discoveries, from shipwrecks to cemeteries, from ancient quarries to buried tombs, a quiet pattern begins to emerge. Human history is not a simple timeline. It is a mosaic. Fragments of innovation appearing in unexpected places. Advanced knowledge emerging, disappearing, and sometimes reappearing centuries later. The engineers who coated reed boats with bitumen along the rivers of Mesopotamia. The metallurgists in Iran experimenting with chromium in steel. The stone carvers shaping perfect spheres in Costa Rica. The early hominins who first discovered that fire could change the nature of stone. Each discovery adds another small piece to a much larger story.
a story that is still being written. Because beneath our cities, beneath our roads, even beneath the quiet landscapes we think we understand, the Earth continues to hold an enormous archive. Silent, patient, waiting for the next moment when someone looks a little closer at what once seemed like nothing more than a stone.